Greetings from Hawaii, I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, you and I are going to paint some true-scale Terminators. Let's go. Thanks for joining me in the studio. I am considerably less muddy than I was about to be when I shot that intro, but more on that in just a minute. This week, we continue our monthly Combat Patrol Challenge by tackling the Space Marines Vanguard Combat Patrol for the second time, only this time because I had so much fun doing the Space Wolves Combat Patrol in January, we are going to paint more Space Vikings. But first, I want to talk very briefly about my family's trip to Hawaii and this incredible mud running excursion that we went on. Now, when I lived in Los Angeles, Hawaii was a short 5-hour flight away, and I had the opportunity to visit on more than one occasion. But it's also a very popular destination from Japan. Now, the flight is a bit longer at about 7.5 hours, but it is a very popular tourist destination for Japanese travelers, and it is not uncommon in the larger cities like Honolulu for restaurants to have menus in both English and Japanese upon request. And of course, there are countless Japanese influences in Hawaiian culture, spam musubi being just one of them. While on vacation recently, my family and I took a day away from the beach to try something new and different, and we embarked upon a day-long mud runner trip through the lowlands and valleys of Maui. It was unlike anything I had ever done before, and a small caravan of 10 ATVs, each capable of carrying 4 passengers, set out from a local horse ranch and spent the day exploring the lowlands and woods of Maui, and it was absolutely amazing. Now, of course, it is advertised as a mud running tour, and the vehicles were built for exactly that. And given that there's a tropical climate and that it rains every day, let's just say my sons weren't disappointed. And being the doting father that I am, I made sure to hit every puddle that I could. Of course, laundry that night was a bit challenging, but in the end, it was all worth it. Well, that's enough about me pretending to be a modern-day Indiana Jones. Let's talk about Space Wolves. Greytide Studios has once again generously sponsored this video and sent along their Primal Hounds STL pack containing over 500 different bits for customizing your Primaris Space Marines to look more like Space Wolves. Now, I had so much fun in January's video using their STL pack to customize the Space Wolves Combat Patrol that I couldn't pass up the chance to tackle the new true-scale Terminators. Everyone loves the new true-scale Terminators that launched with the Leviathan starter box, and given that there are several bits in the Primal Hounds pack meant specifically to customize them to make them look like Wolfguard Terminators, I simply couldn't pass up the chance to convert and paint this entire Combat Patrol. So let me show you how I customized and painted another Space Wolves Combat Patrol. Of course, the Greytide Studios bits give the models a ton of character, but we're going to take the opportunity to do some additional kit bashing here. My problem with this squad is that outside of the Sergeant, they're all holding the blaster in exactly the same pose. It starts to get a bit repetitive, so we'll rummage through our Intercessor's bit box and find some grenade-throwing hands, do some modifications to the models so that they're not all in the exact same pose. Once I have the models together, I'm going to prime them in black, and then we'll do a zenithal with a white primer here, and that's going to help us describe our shapes and also make the blue that we're going to put on later a lot more clear and vibrant. Now, if you remember my last video, I forgot to paint the shoulder pauldrons and had to mask off the entire model. Here we're going to do the reverse. I'm going to paint the shoulders first, and then I'm going to use this stuff. This is liquid mask. It's actually this really fun sort of hobby tool that I don't get to use that often. It's a liquid rubber, and you paint it on, and then after about an hour, it hardens into this semi-translucent rubber mask. And that's going to allow us to paint the rest of the model. Now, I'm going to walk you through step by step how I achieve my Space Wolves look. We start with an underspray of Shadow Gray from Vallejo. Here, we're just making sure to get the underside of the model to create a shadow tone. And then from the top, this is where the magic starts to happen. This is 1 part Vallejo Electric Blue and 5 parts Fenrisian Gray. Mix that up, spray through the airbrush. It looks a little too blue here, but that's fine. Once that's down, we're going to apply a zenithal or a top-down spray of just Fenrisian Grey on the knees and other high points of the model. The next step is going to be washing the entire model in contrast Space Wolves Grey. You'll see how smoothly it goes on here, and that's because I've mixed it 1-to-1 with contrast medium. Once that's fully dry, we're going to dry brush the model really quickly with some Fenrisian Grey to bring our high points back up. And with the armor almost complete, we're going to take a minute to use a rubber tool to peel up that mask. That's going to allow us to pull that away without damaging the paint underneath. And we move on to the sponge chipping. This is an old modeling technique stolen right from scale modeling. Just take a piece of foam, tear it off, dip it in some paint. Here I'm using burnt umber, and then sort of dab it around and it'll catch the high points of the model. Once that's done, I'll move on to things like washing my metallics, and here I have a really simple recipe for leather. I put down a cream or sand color, and then I use contrast wildwood on top of that, and then I'll just dry brush it later on with something like Beastie Brown from Vallejo or Mournfang Brown from Games Workshop. One of the last things I need to do is apply my decals, and I actually have an entirely separate tutorial for this on the channel. I'm going to link that in the corner for you. I always paint my heads separately. It just allows me easier access, and in this case, these 3D printed heads from Greytide Studios, I've simply hot glued them onto an old piece of sprue, I've batch painted them, and once they're all done, I'll pop them off with a twist and then using some super glue attach them to the model. As a thematic choice, there are no helmets in my Space Wolves army. Then I'll take the models from their temporary bases, clip off the post, and using some super glue, attach them to the resin bases. If you'd like to see how I do my bases, check out my Space Wolves Combat Patrol video from January. I have a full tutorial in there. Let's move on to the true scale Terminators released in the Leviathan box. Greytide Studios has some really great themed arms for these guys, so we're going to go ahead and snip off the pegs. Now, quick aside, these are $50 God Hand clippers. See how they pinch that? Those are no joke clippers, but watch this. Boom. That's because those are single-sided clippers. I can't recommend these enough as a hobby upgrade. We've swapped most of the arms out with these really great resin bits from Greytide, but in the case of this model, I really like the pose and I wanted the variety visually in the squad, but because the pauldron is sculpted in, I had to grind it down, as you can see. In the case of the sergeant for the squad, you'll notice that I've clipped away his hand, and look at this. The parts are so well designed that it's a snap fit with friction. Of course, I'll drop a little super glue in there, and I've printed an ice sword. I'm a sucker for ice weapons. We'll put that on, and you'll notice I've replaced the skull on the Imperialis with a wolf skull. With all of our modifications done, it's time to paint the models. So again, we're going to work through that exact same recipe. Here, a black prime, a white zenithal. That's going to define our shapes and help us get a really crisp, clean blue. I've not glued on any of the arms. I've kept those separately, so I just popped those off, painted the yellow there, and masked it off as I did on the Infernus Marines. With the arms detached, I'll go ahead and apply my electric blue and Fenrisian Grey combo and do a top-down zenithal of just Fenrisian Grey. Then I'll brush on that contrast Space Wolves Grey into all my recesses. Now you might have noticed on some of these that I'm doing a very subtle airbrush along the bottom of the greaves, and this is just pure contrast Space Wolves Grey. The trick here is to make sure it doesn't pool up. I also do a small hit of that along the back slope to sort of exaggerate the curve of the armor. We'll go ahead and use the rubber tool to pull off the mask, and so satisfying. Once we've reattached that, we'll go around and sponge chip the armor. This is just such a simple technique that adds a lot of sort of wear and sort of grim darkness to the models. I absolutely love it. Now, as another thematic element of my army, there are no pure golds. We're going to stick with these bronze-type golds, and this is just Balthazar gold from Games Workshop, and then I wash it with a Athonian camo shade. I'm going to hit that twice, so I'll let it dry and hit it with a second coat of Athonian camo shade. And then I'll go back through and hit my highlights with Balthazar gold again, and then some Canoptic alloy. Here, I'm just using lead belcher to paint all of the metallics on the guns, and in this case, the autocannon. Once I've got that set, I'll glue it back onto the model. Because this is plastic to plastic, I'll use Tamiya Thin. And then we want to do some heat effects here First, we're going to apply Reikland Flesh Shade, let that dry, and then we'll hit it with a Druchii Violet. Very quickly, I am going to dry brush the Frost blade here. It's just a sky blue with a white dry brush on it. And then those heads that we batch painted, we'll pop those off and then using super glue attach them to the models. Now for the Sergeant, Greytide Studios has included these really great capes that are very Space Wolfy. I couldn't pass up the opportunity, so we'll just go ahead and paint that, detail it out, and then use some super glue to attach it. And then of course, once we've got them on our resin bases, we'll just finish with a little bit of that Valhalla Blizzard. I absolutely love this stuff. I tend to go overboard with it, but in this case, I'm pretty proud of my restraint. Moving on to the Librarian, he gets a few of the custom bits from the Greytide Studios Primal Hounds pack, including this really great ornamental headpiece and a shoulder pauldron. Now, one of the reasons why I've swapped out the left shoulder pauldron is because it contained the symbol of the Librarius, which is the horned skull. And special thanks to the Space Wolves subreddit, who was willing to answer all of my questions about what Space Wolves librarians do and how a rune priest is different from a regular librarian, and the fact that they avoid all the symbols of the Librarius. So I worked my way around the model, snipping those off wherever there were. In the case of the left pauldron, we just replaced the entire thing. And then on the Force Axe, I've gone ahead and snipped off the Librarius skulls, printed some more of those wolf skulls, and super glued them on as ornamentation. We're going to tackle this guy the way we did any others, but there are a few things like these power cables. Here we've just laid down our yellows and reds, and then we'll use Reikland Flesh Shade to shade those. And then we'll use some khakis and some pale sands to bring out the bones on that reliquary. And then I'm going to make special mention of how I did the Force Axe here. We want to indicate some, mystical powers. So this is just Vallejo sky blue watered way down into almost a glaze. And then I'll just apply that on the blade. And once that's dried, we'll just go through and, using the side of our brush, use a white to hit the raised areas. It's not nearly as difficult as it looks if you use the right techniques and sort of let the model paint itself. And then lastly, once we get it on its sculpted base, we're going to go ahead and put some Valhalla Blizzard down. It's time to move on to the centerpiece of this combat patrol, and that is the captain. He has this really great cape, but there's a very wolfy cape in the Primal Hounds pack, so I couldn't pass that up. I did snip off the cape very carefully so that I could use it in a future project, and I also couldn't pass up the chance to give him a Thunderhammer. I mean, what self-respecting Viking leader charges into combat with a sword instead of a Thunderhammer? So I printed that out and superglued that on. Again, you've seen me paint 6 Terminators at this point. You know the deal. We're going to do Shadow Gray on the underside, Electric Blue and Fenrisian Gray along the top, and then pure Fenrisian Gray, and then a dry brush, and then we'll go through our chipping. But I wanted to show you this. I messed up. Occasionally this will happen when you're sponge chipping. It's not an exact science, and things can go wrong. Don't worry, keep your water and your brush nearby. And you can see before this gets the chance to dry, we'll just go through, clean that right up. We're back to where we started, no problem. We'll just move on from there. Here I'll work my way around the model, painting my metallics like on the Stormbolter and the Hammer, using the absolutely amazing Games Workshop Lead Belcher. I love this paint. And then we'll move on to our golds. Again, no pure golds in the army. We're going to use Balthazar gold and then shade it with a Thonian camo shade to sort of antique it, give it a patina. I love the way that it falls into the recesses on these details. Now this head happens to be a plastic head from a Games Workshop kit, so I'll use Tamiya Thin to apply that, and we are all set. We just need to finish the base to give him something to stand on, and because this came from the Leviathan box, he has this really great themed base, so I'm going to go ahead and paint this the way I paint all of my Tyranids. If you want to see how I did the Tyranid Combat Patrol from the Leviathan box, you can check out the video that I'm linking in the corner now. It was a lot of fun. Tyranids, my first real army outside of the starter box, so special place in my heart there. I did spend maybe a little too long detailing out the base when the focus should really be on the character, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity. Here, because we're going plastic to plastic, I'm going to use Revell Contacta Pro. It locks it in. It's as good as Tamiya is. This is even better. And finally, we're going to move back to that cape. If you take your time and wet blend, you can end up with results like that. It is time consuming, but the results sort of speak for themselves. Then we'll use super glue to glue that on. Again, not as dynamic as the cape that's included, but I couldn't pass up the wolfiness. And, of course, we're going to finish with some Valhalla Blizzard. And there you have it, a second Space Wolves combat patrol completed. I didn't have start a brand new Space Marines army on my 2024 bingo card, but here we are. I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my genuine pleasure to make and share with you. If you'd like to support the channel, please like, comment, or subscribe. Help drive us to the front page of YouTube and grow our audience. And of course, you can always join our Discord. Now remember that joining the Discord at any level grants you access to our private Discord server where like-minded hobbyists give each other kind and honest feedback every day to help each other grow. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.